Florida is far more than beaches and theme parks. Beneath its swamps, coastlines, and forests lie the remains of ancient civilizations, engineered shell mounds, coral rock structures, and prehistoric burials preserved for thousands of years in peat. Long before modern cities rose, complex indigenous societies shaped this land in ways we are still uncovering. What looks like a sun-soaked paradise today is actually a landscape layered with deep, hidden history, waiting to be understood. South of Miami, in the quiet city of Homestead, behind thick coral walls and swaying palm trees, stands one of the most unusual landmarks in the United States, Coral Castle. At first glance, it feels less like a tourist attraction and more like a dream someone carved into stone. Massive gates that once moved with the push of a finger, spiral staircases cut from solid rock, towering blocks weighing several tons, shaped and positioned with startling precision. Everything was built by one man, working mostly alone, often at night, and without modern machinery. That man was Edward Leeds Kalnin, a quiet Latvian immigrant who stood about 5 feet tall and weighed roughly 100 pounds. In 1923, he began constructing what he originally called Rock Gate Park. He said he was building it for his Sweet 16, a young woman in Latvia who had ended their engagement the day before their wedding. Heartbroken, he left for America. Coral Castle became the project that consumed the rest of his life. What makes the site so compelling is not just the romance behind it, but the method. The structure is made of oolitic limestone, a relatively soft coral rock native to South Florida that hardens when exposed to air. Although not as dense as granite, the blocks are still enormous. Many weigh several tons. The entire complex totals over 1,100 tons of stone. Leeds Kalnin had no cranes, no visible crew, and no formal engineering education. Yet over nearly 3 decades, he quarried, carved, lifted, and positioned each piece himself. Neighbors claimed they occasionally glimpsed him working by lantern light. Some later embellished these stories, saying the stones seemed to float like balloons. There is no verified evidence of that, but the mystery of how such a small man managed such heavy material has fueled speculation ever since. When asked how he accomplished it, Ed would calmly reply, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage." That explanation may sound simple, but it is likely the most accurate one. Historians and engineers who have studied the site believe he relied on tripods made of telephone poles, block and tackle pulley systems, chains and careful balancing techniques, tools consistent with early 20th century mechanical knowledge. Photographs taken during the period show wooden derricks and lifting devices on the property. In 1936, concerned nearby development, Leeds Kalnin decided to move the entire structure about 10 miles north to its present location in Homestead. He hired a local trucking company to transport the stones. However, he refused to let the drivers watch him load or unload the pieces. By the time they returned, the stones were ready. The secrecy deepened the legend. Inside Coral Castle, symbolism blends science, astronomy, and personal imagination. There is a working sundial, accurate within a few minutes, a Polaris-aligned telescope made of stone, a crescent moon sculpture, a throne room with carved chairs. The layout includes geometric alignments that reflect Leeds Kalnin's fascination with cosmic order and magnetism. One of the most famous features was a 9-ton revolving gate that pivoted so perfectly balanced that a child could push it open with one hand. When it stopped functioning in 1986 due to bearing failure, engineers used modern cranes to remove it. They discovered that it had been balanced on a truck axle shaft set precisely through its center of gravity, a clever but entirely mechanical solution. It was an impressive feat of alignment and patience rather than supernatural engineering. Leeds Kalnin also published a small booklet titled Magnetic Current, outlining his personal theories about magnetism and energy. His ideas do not align with modern physics, but they reveal how deeply he thought about invisible forces and natural laws. Over time, this fascination with magnetism inspired more fantastical claims that he had rediscovered secrets used at Stonehenge or even the Great Pyramid of Giza. There is no credible evidence supporting those connections, yet the comparisons persist because the site feels ancient, deliberate, and strangely timeless. Despite all the speculation, anti-gravity theories, lost Atlantean technology, secret energy fields, the most convincing explanation remains disciplined application of leverage, geometry, and extraordinary patience. What truly sets Coral Castle apart is not mystical technology, but singular devotion. Leedskalnin never remarried. He never sought fame. He lived in a small room on the property among his sculptures, charging visitors just a few cents for admission. His signs were simple and direct. When asked about his methods, he would smile and say, "It's not difficult if you know how." He died in 1951, leaving no dramatic confession and no hidden blueprint explaining everything. His handmade tools, tripods, chains, pulleys, were found on site. They were humble, almost crude, yet apparently sufficient. Today, walking through Coral Castle is a quiet experience. The limestone walls glow warm under the Florida sun. The air is thick with salt and insects. The geometry feels intentional, almost meditative. Whether one sees it as an engineering puzzle, a monument to heartbreak, or an act of lifelong obsession, the atmosphere carries a sense of solitude. Perhaps that is the real mystery, not how it was built, but why one man would dedicate nearly 30 years of his life to carving thousands of tons of stone in silence. Coral Castle endures hurricanes, humidity, and decades of debate without a single stone shifting from its place. It stands not as proof of lost ancient powers, but as evidence of what focus, mechanical ingenuity, and emotional conviction can achieve. In the end, Coral Castle may not defy physics, but it does challenge our assumptions about human determination, and sometimes that is mystery enough.
At the mouth of Tampa Bay, where the Gulf's turquoise waters meet shifting sandbars, lies a small island that feels detached from the modern world, Egmont Key. From a distance, it looks serene, sea oats bending in the wind, palms scattered across pale sand, a lighthouse rising above low vegetation. But step ashore, and the illusion of simplicity fades. Crumbling brick walls emerge from the trees, concrete batteries face the open water, fragments of foundations lie half buried in sand. Egmont Key is not just a quiet island, it is a layered archive of Florida's past, indigenous, military, maritime, and human. You can only reach it by boat. That isolation is part of its power. As you approach, the ruins appear suddenly, as if revealed rather than built. Weathered structures softened by salt air, pathways overtaken by roots, buildings partially swallowed by dunes. The air smells of salt and seagrass, gulls cry overhead, waves break in steady rhythm. It is beautiful, and it is undeniably haunted by history. Long before brick fortifications or lighthouse beams, indigenous peoples used this island. Archaeological evidence shows that native communities visited or occupied Egmont Key for thousands of years prior to European contact. Shell middens, large accumulations of oyster, clam, and other shell remains, mixed with bone and artifacts, once dotted parts of the island. These were not random refuse piles. They mark repeated habitation, fishing, gathering, and likely seasonal encampments. While it is difficult to assign the island definitively to a single named group, the area was historically associated with peoples linked to the safety harbor culture, including the Tocobaga of the central Gulf Coast. Over time, storms and later military construction destroyed or disturbed many of the original middens, but fragments still surface after heavy weather, quiet reminders that Egmont Key's story began long before European maps recorded its name. The island entered written history in dramatic fashion. In 1848, a powerful hurricane devastated the Tampa Bay region, destroying ships and coastal settlements. In response, the U.S. government authorized construction of the Egmont Key Lighthouse in 1849 to guide ships safely through the bay's dangerous shoals. That first lighthouse did not last long. Another hurricane severely damaged it within a decade. In 1858, a new lighthouse was constructed, the structure that still stands today, weathered but enduring. It remains one of the island's most recognizable features, a vertical reminder of human attempts to impose order on shifting coastlines.
Then came war. During the American Civil War, Union forces seized control of Egmont Key early in the conflict. Its strategic location at the mouth of Tampa Bay made it an ideal base for enforcing the Union blockade of Confederate supply routes. The lighthouse keeper, suspected of Confederate sympathies, fled the island. Union troops established a presence, using the island as both a military outpost and a refuge for formerly enslaved people escaping to Union lines. In the 1850s, during the Third Seminole War, the island had already served as a temporary holding site for captured Seminole prisoners before forced removal westward. Later, during the Spanish-American War in 1898, Egmont Key housed Cuban refugees fleeing conflict. The island's history is not just military, it is deeply tied to displacement, survival, and human upheaval. By the late 19th century, global tensions again reshaped the island. After the Spanish-American War, fears of foreign naval threats led the U.S. Army to fortify key coastal locations. Egmont Key became home to Fort Dade, a substantial coastal defense installation constructed beginning in the 1890s. Fort Dade transformed the island into a functioning military community. Brick barracks, artillery batteries, officers' quarters, a hospital, storehouses, even recreational facilities like a small theater and tennis courts were built. At its height, more than 300 people, soldiers and their families, lived there. Streets were laid out in orderly fashion. Guns were positioned to guard the bay entrance. Yet, despite the scale of construction, the fort's massive artillery was never fired in combat. Advancements in naval technology and shifting military strategies rendered fixed coastal defenses increasingly obsolete. By 1923, Fort Dade was officially decommissioned and largely abandoned. Walking the island today, you can still trace the outlines of that vanished town. Cracked brick streets lead nowhere. Staircases climb toward empty platforms. Concrete gun batteries stare blankly out at open water. Palm trees grow through former living quarters, their roots breaking apart brick foundations. Nature is not merely surrounding the ruins, it is actively reclaiming them. And the sea is always advancing. Egmont Key is constantly reshaped by erosion. Hurricanes and tidal currents eat away at its shoreline year after year. Entire sections of Fort Dade have already been lost to the Gulf. After storms, visitors sometimes find bricks, tiles, or fragments of old walls newly exposed on the beach, only to see them vanish again with the next tide. The island feels temporary, as though history itself is being dissolved grain by grain.
There is also an atmosphere that many visitors describe as strangely still. Not silent. Seabirds call, wind moves through grasses, waves break continuously, but layered with a sense of pause. The abandoned lighthouse, the empty batteries, the partially buried foundations all contribute to a feeling that the island is suspended between eras. For historians and archaeologists, Egmont Key remains active ground. Beneath the sand lie remnants of indigenous tools, pottery fragments, military debris, and traces of everyday life from multiple centuries. Each storm shifts the boundary between past and present, uncovering artifacts and then recovering them. The island is less a static monument and more a living process of exposure and erasure. Today, Egmont Key is protected as a state park and wildlife refuge, jointly managed by the Florida Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There are no permanent civilian residents, No hotels, no restaurants, no electricity grid supporting modern infrastructure. Visitors arrive by ferry or private boat, explore for a few hours, and depart before evening. Wildlife now dominates the island. Seabirds nesting in dunes, gopher tortoises burrowing through sandy soil. Rangers monitor both ecological and historical preservation. Human presence is temporary once again.
Along the western shore of Tampa Bay, near the quiet city of Safety Harbor, the land rises gently above the water. At first glance, it looks like a natural hill, but the symmetry gives it away. The slope is too deliberate, the summit too level. This is the Great Mound associated with the Tocobana people, one of the last visible traces of a society that once dominated Florida's central Gulf Coast. Today, the mound stands within Philippe Park, a waterfront park shaded by ancient oaks. Families picnic here, children play, boats pass in the distance. Few visitors realize they are walking across the layered remains of a powerful chiefdom that flourished centuries before Europeans arrived. The Tocobaga, often misspelled Tocobaga, were part of what archaeologists call the Safety Harbor culture, which thrived roughly between 900 and 1500 CE along Florida's central Gulf Coast. They lived in a landscape shaped by estuaries, tidal flats, mangroves, and abundant fisheries, a place where the boundary between land and sea shifted daily with the tides. The mound at Safety Harbor is believed to have been the central ceremonial and political hub of the Tocobaga chiefdom, possibly its capital. Rising about 20 feet high, it overlooks the wide sweep of the bay. It was built entirely by hand over generations, using baskets to carry layers of shell, sand, and soil. Each layer represents years of labor, ritual, and renewal. This was not a random pile of earth, it was engineered. Platform mounds like this often supported important structures, temples, council houses, or the residence of a chief. Around the main mound would have stood wooden dwellings with thatched palm roofs, arranged around plazas used for gatherings and ceremonies. The mound elevated leadership and ritual above the surrounding landscape, physically and symbolically. From the top, the view stretches across open water toward the Gulf. That vantage point mattered. The Tocobaga were maritime people. They fished for mullet and catfish, harvested oysters from shell middens, and traveled through coastal waterways in dugout canoes carved from massive tree trunks. The sea was not just a food source, it was a highway, a spiritual presence, and a defining feature of identity. Artifacts found at the site, pottery fragments, carved shell tools, ornamental objects, reflect both practicality and artistic expression. The pottery style connects the site to other Safety Harbor culture settlements across the region, confirming that this was a major center of influence.
Like many mound-building societies across North America, the Tocobaga likely regarded these structures as sacred spaces. Some mounds in the region served as burial sites. Others functioned as platforms for elite or ceremonial buildings. It is possible that the Safety Harbor Mound served multiple purposes over time: political center, ritual stage, symbol of authority. The mound's alignment with the bay may also have carried meaning. Some researchers speculate that its placement related to celestial events, seasonal cycles, or tidal rhythms, blending practical observation with spiritual worldview. While definitive proof is limited, the positioning was almost certainly intentional. European contact changed everything. In 1528, the ill-fated expedition of Panfilo de Narvaez encountered powerful chiefdoms along Florida's Gulf Coast, likely including Tocobaga-related groups. Later, in 1567, Pedro Menendez de Avilés, founder of St. Augustine, sailed into Tampa Bay and made contact with the Tocobaga. Spanish accounts describe a large village organized around a central mound with surrounding dwellings and defensive palisades. They noted the people's skill in canoe travel and fishing and their structured leadership.
The Spanish attempted to establish a mission in the area, but tensions quickly escalated. Conflict, forced labor systems, slave raids, and, most devastating of all, European diseases such as smallpox swept through indigenous populations. Within little more than a century, the Tocobaga as a distinct political entity had disappeared. Like many native groups in Florida, survivors were absorbed into other communities, displaced, or lost to epidemics. By the 1700s, their villages were gone. Only the mounds remained. For decades, the Safety Harbor Mound stood largely neglected, overgrown, and unrecognized for its significance. Systematic archaeological work in the late 19th and early 20th centuries began to document its structure. Carefully layered shell and sand, sometimes alternating with ash deposits, suggesting repeated episodes of construction and use. Today, the mound is protected and recognized as a National Historic Landmark. It remains one of the few surviving ceremonial mounds in Florida that is still largely intact in its original setting. A few miles from the launch pads of the Kennedy Space Center, near the city of Titusville, there is an unremarkable patch of land once known as Windover. Today, it looks like many other parts of Central Florida: flat ground, trees, reeds, and standing water. Nothing about it suggests that beneath its surface lay one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries ever made in North America: the Windover Pond burials, often called the Windover Bog Bodies. In 1982, construction crews preparing the area for a housing development struck something unexpected. At first, they assumed it was driftwood or debris buried in the muck. When human bones became visible, law enforcement was called, suspecting a modern crime scene. It did not take long, however, for archaeologists to realize they were standing over something far older and far more significant. What emerged over months of careful excavation was not a single grave, but an entire cemetery. More than 160 individuals had been buried in what was once a shallow pond. Radiocarbon dating placed the burials between roughly 6,000 and 5,000 BCE, around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. That makes the site older than the Great Pyramid of Giza and older than Stonehenge. At a time when monumental architecture had not yet risen elsewhere in the world, people in what is now Florida were practicing complex and deliberate burial rituals. What makes Windover extraordinary is not only its age, but its preservation. The pond's peat, not peat, but peat, a dense layer of partially decayed plant material, created an oxygen-poor environment that dramatically slowed decomposition. Unlike most prehistoric burials in North America, the remains at Windover were astonishingly intact. Entire skeletons were recovered. In some cases, preserved brain tissue survived within skulls, allowing researchers to attempt early forms of DNA analysis, groundbreaking work in the 1980s. Fragments of hair, soft tissue, and even woven textiles were found. The textiles are especially significant. They are among the oldest known fabrics ever discovered in North America. Carefully woven from plant fibers, they reveal technical skill and aesthetic intention. These were not crude wrappings. The patterns were deliberate, the weaving tight and controlled. Long before metal tools or pottery became widespread in the region, these people had mastered fiber technology. A few miles from the launch pads of the Kennedy Space Center, near the city of Titusville, there is an unremarkable patch of land once known as Windover. Today, it looks like many other parts of Central Florida: flat ground, trees, reeds, and standing water. Nothing about it suggests that beneath its surface lay one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries. Archaeologists gradually pieced together a portrait of the community. They were hunter-gatherers living along the edge of what had once been a freshwater pond. Their diet included fish, turtles, deer, small mammals, and wild plants. Their teeth show heavy wear from fibrous foods and possibly from using teeth as tools. Their bones indicate physically demanding lives, yet many individuals lived into middle age or beyond, suggesting relative stability. The burial practices are what truly set Windover apart. The dead were placed carefully in the pond, laid on their sides in a flexed position. Wooden stakes were used to anchor some of the bodies, likely to prevent them from floating as decomposition gases formed. Many were wrapped in woven mats or cloth. Some were buried with grave goods, tools, ornaments, or personal items. Children, elders, and individuals with serious medical conditions were all given the same careful treatment. One woman showed clear evidence of severe arthritis and had survived for years with the condition. Another burial revealed a child with a congenital disorder who had lived far longer than expected for someone with such a condition in a foraging society. These details suggest something profound. This community cared for its vulnerable members. Survival was not purely individual, it was social. DNA analysis later confirmed that the Windover people were ancestral to later Native American populations of the Southeast. They were not a lost civilization in a mysterious sense. They were among the early peoples who repopulated North America after the last ice age, part of the long human story of migration and adaptation. One of the most debated questions remains: why bury the dead in water? Submerged burials are rare, particularly in such consistent and organized form. Some researchers propose that the pond represented a symbolic boundary, a liminal space between life and death. Others argue it may have been partly practical. Soft sediment allowed easier digging than hard ground, and the environment incidentally preserved the bodies. There is no definitive answer. What is clear is that the act was intentional and repeated over generations.
Deep in the southern reaches of Everglades, where water moves like a sheet of glass and the horizon dissolves into sawgrass and sky, there persists a legend that refuses to die: the story of a lost city hidden beneath the marsh. The Everglades are not a typical swamp, as they are often described. They are, in truth, a vast, slow-moving river flowing from Lake Okeechobee toward Florida Bay, spreading across millions of acres of wetlands. Cypress domes rise from shallow waters, mangroves clutch the edges of brackish inlets, tree islands form natural sanctuaries above the flood. It is a landscape that shifts with seasons and storms, swallowing and revealing pieces of itself in cycles that can span centuries. In such a place, mystery feels natural. Stories of a lost city began circulating in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when settlers, surveyors, and adventurers pushed deeper into southern Florida. They often repeated accounts attributed to native communities, primarily the Seminole and later the Miccosukee, about unusual stone features hidden in remote parts of the wetlands. It is important to clarify something here. There is no verified Seminole or Miccosukee tradition describing a grand stone metropolis swallowed by the swamp. What indigenous communities did speak of were sacred sites, ancestral places, and ceremonial grounds, locations outsiders may have misunderstood or romanticized into something more dramatic. As the dry season lowered water levels, some explorers claimed they saw stone formations protruding from mudflats, straight edges, circular depressions, and arrangements that appeared too symmetrical to be accidental. In an environment dominated by water and vegetation, even a few exposed rocks could ignite the imagination. During the 1920s, scattered reports surfaced from independent explorers who insisted they had discovered limestone blocks arranged like walls in remote areas near Cape Sable at the southwestern tip of the Florida peninsula. One widely circulated claim came from a man often identified in newspapers of the time as F.W. Skills, though historical records about him are fragmentary and inconsistent. He described low stone alignments and round holes carved into bedrock. Newspapers amplified the story, suggesting the remains of an unknown civilization. Yet no formal archaeological documentation was ever produced. Follow-up expeditions struggled against flooding, thick vegetation, mosquitoes, and navigational hazards. When later investigators attempted to relocate the supposed ruins, they found nothing conclusive. The Everglades have a way of erasing footprints.
While the lost city remains unproven, southern Florida absolutely was home to sophisticated pre-Columbian cultures. Most notable among them were the Calusa, who thrived along Florida's southwest coast for more than 1,000 years before European contact. The Calusa were not stone city builders, but that does not make them any less remarkable. They engineered massive shell mounds, constructed canal systems, and built entire settlements atop artificial islands made from layers of shell and sediment. Some of their works still stand today, including the impressive complex at Mound Key. These were master water engineers. They created fish corrals and canal networks long before Europeans arrived. Their society was hierarchical, organized, and deeply adapted to life in the wetlands. However, there is no archaeological evidence that the Calusa, or any known southeastern tribe, constructed large limestone block cities in the Everglades. The Everglades rest upon a broad limestone platform formed from ancient marine sediments. Over thousands of years, water erosion has sculpted this porous rock into unusual shapes. Sinkholes, solution holes, and straight-edged fractures are common. Under certain conditions, these formations can look strikingly artificial. Circular depressions in limestone, for example, are often the result of chemical weathering rather than human carving. Linear fractures may align with natural fault patterns. In aerial imagery, especially older, low-resolution photography, shadows and vegetation contrasts can resemble geometric designs. In the 1930s, and again in mid-20th century aerial surveys, observers reported seeing grid-like shapes or straight lines from above. But repeated ground verification failed to confirm constructed foundations or roads. Modern technologies, including LiDAR scanning, have revolutionized archaeological mapping in Central America beneath jungle canopies. Yet in the Everglades, despite extensive surveying, no buried stone metropolis has been confirmed. As with many mysterious landscape stories, the legend eventually attracted more dramatic interpretations. Some speculated about connections to Atlantis, the mythical lost island described by Plato. Others linked the Everglades legend to the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, an underwater limestone formation discovered in 1968. While some claim it is a man-made structure tied to Atlantis, the majority of geologists classify it as a natural beach rock formation shaped by coastal processes. It is true that at the end of the last ice age, sea levels were significantly lower. Large portions of what is now southern Florida were dry land. As glaciers melted and oceans rose, coastlines shifted dramatically. Ancient campsites that once stood on dry ground may now lie underwater or buried beneath sediment. But this does not necessarily imply the existence of a stone-built lost city.